What? Oh, the jacket, right. Sorry. Oh man. Okay. So, hey everybody, how we all doing today? Tekking and Barry back again. Are you ready for a big one? Because this is a big one, all right? I feel like I'm going to be saying that a lot as we go forward in One Piece. This is a crazy time to be a One Piece fan because this is the moment in the story where we begin to find out every mystery in the story. And, you know, if you're reading a manga that only lasted maybe like 3 years or so, that's not that big of a deal. You know, like Undead Unluck, if you're reading Undead Unluck right now, they're at a point in the story where we're starting to find out a lot about like the whole mysteries of the story, right? But then you're talking about One Piece, which is a manga that has went on for a quarter of a century now, 25 years plus. So there's a lot of mysteries, okay? And Oda has said this before. A lot of the mysteries, a lot of the stuff revolving around devil fruits in particular, because we're all interested in like where devil fruits come from, what they even are to begin with. Oda explained that a certain scientist has all the information on that we would ever need to know. The person that really cracked the nugget when it came to what devil fruits are and where they came from and how they actually change your body and everything like that, where the powers come from. I'm sort of curious of just like how there's certain devil fruits that embody like the concepts of like laundry and like, you know, Baby Five's like arms fruit that just has the ability of weapons. You know, I'm like interested in like how those paramecia fruits work. Zone fruits, I feel like the general vibe is that they're animal spirits that are trapped inside fruits. Now that mechanism on its own, we don't know how that works, but I think that's fair to say they're like animal spirits, and then logias are like elements, okay? So, you know, these are questions we've had for decades, literally decades, and this is the arc where we're finally going to find out about it because Vegapunk has made, well, maybe a robot of Vegapunk or a clone of Vegapunk or Vegapunk's daughter or granddaughter or somebody related to Vegapunk that's referring to themselves as Dr. Vegapunk has appeared in the One Piece story, okay? Chapter 1061, spoilers. Here we go. Okay, so first things first, I'm sort of going to go back and go over every single thing that we know about Vegapunk up until now, and I'm actually not going to go, I'm going to go chronologically in the One Piece story itself, not like how many times we've like heard about Vegapunk in the manga, like reading it, but like as much as we know and understand about Vegapunk's life, okay? And so with that being said, we're now going to start on the future land of Baldimore on Karakuri Island. Karakuri is the name of the island. The kingdom is Baldimore, the future land, okay? This was the location that Franky got sent flying by Kuma during the, you know, when all the Straw Hats were split up during Sabaody Archipelago. And just like how Nami got sent to Weatheria, the absolute perfect island for Nami, the navigator, to train with weather science, Franky got sent to Baldimore to learn about actual science. Yeah, weather science. That's not real science. Meteorology. I hear they don't even actually study meteors in meteorology. I mean, what's going on with that? Franky's learning real science, robots and lasers. Exactly, right? So Franky got sent to Baldimore. It is a very cold winter island. There's a giant mountain that has like a huge like stake ran through it or some kind of like diode or something. And the explanation that was given was that Vegapunk, back in his younger years, tried to essentially build an island-wide warming device so the citizens of the land could live, you know, in a nice tropical environment instead of a frigid cold one. Unfortunately, Vegapunk was never able to actually complete the device. We don't exactly know what happened. Maybe he couldn't figure out like a power source for it or whatever. But we just see the island still frozen over with this giant experiment like embedded in the mountain, sort of like Frankenstein a little bit, right? Though Frankenstein's monster, I guess, okay? So that was the explanation that was given. Now, we get a lot more of Baldimore in the anime because we have that whole like filler arc where Franky becomes an English gentleman, which, once again, it was filler, but it was Franky filler, and that's the top level of all filler in the One Piece world, right? Oh my god. I want Franky to do so much in this arc. Like, I might just make a separate video about that, like all the stuff Franky needs to do in this arc, but like, first and foremost, I want a scene where the Straw Hats are just walking through Vegapunk's lab, and he's explaining what all this stuff does, or I guess, well, okay, so let's address that really quick. I am pretty damn sure that the character that we met in the last chapter is either like a robot being controlled by Vegapunk or some sort of drone or something something like that, or cyborg or clone or something like that. I don't think it's the actual Dr. Vegapunk. Also, there was a thing where a lot of people brought up that, like, you know how whenever a character is introduced in One Piece, we always see, like, the little title box that appears. Not all the time, but usually we see that. In fact, we saw that in the last chapter with Dahl and with Hibari and with Prince Groose, who were the members of Sword of the Marines at G14. We got to see their little title boxes. We didn't see a title box, like, under Vegapunk. You know, that character introduced herself as, like, oh, I am the government's lead scientist, Dr. Vegapunk, or you can call me Dr. Vegapunk, but we didn't see anything underneath it. Vegapunk has been referred to as a man, as like an old man, plenty of times by the Marines. That seems to be the general idea what Oda's going with. So I'm thinking this is like a red herring, maybe like a diversion of like who Vegapunk really is. Mega Vegapunk is like this old man that really can't move around too well, so he's like robots and stuff, or clones, or cyborgs, or doing whatever. We also saw a cyborg shark that was based on an actual shark, because one of the things that Dr. Vegapunk explained upon arriving was like, oh, yes, well, that shark, you know, I can't mitigate its primal desires. You know, it always tries to eat ships whenever, you know, I send it out scouting, you know. So that was like an actual shark that had like cyborg enhancements. And then there was the giant robot that sort of resembles the Franky Shogun a little bit, like in terms of the leg design and everything like that. And that's Vega Force 1, and it had like a number 12 on it. So I'm imagining like there's different divisions of Vegapunk's like creations for battle, okay? Because on the shark we saw a 3, and on the giant Vega Force 1 robot we saw a 12. So I'm thinking there's maybe like an army of Vanguard robots, like just an army of giant robots, and that's Vega Force 1, okay? And then they're numbered, you know, Vega Force 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 12, or maybe more than that, okay? And then the shark might represent like the naval force of Vegapunk's army. Like, if you're a mad scientist, you need to make a giant robot army. Metal Knight did it in One Punch Man, and now Vegapunk's doing it now in One Piece. I mean, what else do you do, right? You're a mad scientist. You have mad science skills. You've discovered all the secrets of the world. You can build giant robots. Why wouldn't you build a giant robot army, okay? So then we have, like, the shark. Maybe that represents the naval unit that can actually, like, the robot could swim underwater as well, but the shark is obviously, you know, like, dedicated to that. Also might represent maybe that series is maybe, like, the cyborg animal series that Vegapunk clearly has an affinity for, because we saw that on Baldimore with the robot animals. It was actually the robot animals that helped build, you know, the giant, like, spikes going into the mountain, like the heating apparatus and stuff like that, and Franky ran into there. So, you know, that's a situation with that there. So I just realized I was supposed to go into a chronological order, and now we're jumping back to the chapter all of a sudden. Okay, back on track here. Just skirt. Okay, so Vegapunk grew up on Baldimore, and this is where his first laboratory was. This is the laboratory that Franky found. You know, it was all boarded up and everything like that. So it's implied Vegapunk has not been on this island for many, many, many years, okay? And that woman that we saw in the last chapter that introduced herself as Dr. Vegapunk didn't look much older, like in her 20s. Yes, you could always throw something in there. In fact, I had a theory for a long time that Dr. Vegapunk may very well be like hundreds and hundreds of years old, but uses cyborg enhancements in order to keep himself like living. But you don't even have to go that far with it. It was revealed that Vegapunk literally discovered the lineage factor. He broke down what DNA really is in the One Piece world, so he might be able to invent like you know, an eternal youth serum. It might just be possible, but it might be like, you know, he made clones or something because he cracked the human genome or whatever. Okay, so all right. Back to Baldimore, okay? He lived on the island, and it was many, many years ago, and the people there seemed to really like him. They really, like, appreciated Vegapunk's efforts in trying to heat up the island, even though he ultimately failed, and he was very upset by it. You know, he was, like, trying to help out the people there. So they always really liked him, okay? So he didn't give the impression of, like, a mean guy. He doesn't seem to be, like, a person that's just, like, a cruel, like, I will rule the world with my robot army! Doesn't seem to be like that kind kind of person. He seemed to have a very good heart, okay? And so at some point, he left Baldimore. Now, this may or may not be during the creation of MADS or after. So MADS is the mad scientist operation, like, little group that Vega Punk was part of, Judge was part of, and Queen was part of, okay? And this took place, I want to say, at least 30 years ago, okay? Because the idea is that after MADS broke up, Queen went to go join Kaito's crew, and Judge left to go, you know, like, build up the Germa. And we see their technology in their individual fields. Queen's specialty is viruses and, like, chemical warfare and that kind of stuff. And then we see also made some robots that we saw, like the Marys and stuff on you know, Onigashima. And then we have Judge, whose focus was cloning technology. Now, all this stuff could only be possible if you discovered what the lineage factor was. So it all kind of ties back to one piece of research. Like, once you've figured out lineage factor, it makes developing viruses and things that mess with your DNA. Because that's what the Ice Oni did. That's what the virus did. It altered your DNA a little bit into, like, the Ice Oni or whatever. And then you have Judge with the cloning tech making all the Germa soldiers. Obviously, it should be pretty obvious what, you know, like the human genome and, like, DNA and, like, the lineage factor would involve there, okay? So Vega Punk, though, is the master of all of this. You know, Judge and Queen might be very skilled in particular, but it's Vega Punk that has the big brain here, all right? So I like to think either MADS was founded on Baldimore, or he left Baldimore, boarded up his old laboratory, left, you know, founded MADS. At some point, the world government probably broke it up, and they were like, okay, you can either work for us or you could be branded a criminal, okay? Because obviously the world government is like, you know, this is the greatest scientist in the world that is like 500 years ahead of their time. We want them working for us, you know what I mean? And so that's probably most likely what happened at that point. Vega Punk then, probably like 30-something years ago, went to go work for the world government. And so Baldimore was left largely like a museum, honestly. Like, there was a Marine base on the island. They sort of stayed away from Vega Punk's lab because there was a bunch of, like, treasure trove of information in there. The information, I think this might have been anime only, but we did actually see Franky looking at blueprints in the lab, and some of the blueprints were like, you know, devil fruit research, you know, cyborg animal research and things of that nature, laser research. So this might have been during when Vega Punk was in MADS. It might have been after. Maybe even Vega Punk did work at Baldimore a little bit for a while. He was part of the world government, but maybe then the world government set himself up at, like, Punk Hazard. Of like, oh, okay, you know, you're working on Baldimore, that's great, but we've just built, like, a state-of-the-art, because the world government has money, you know, because as long as Vega Punk was working for them and, you know, building whatever they wanted to build, whatever weapons they wanted to build, the sea prism on the bottom of the ships, you know, the Tenryubito apparently were interested in dragons, so Vega Punk was now, like, biologically engineering dragons and shit. So they have the money, so they build this huge research station on Punk Hazard, back when Punk Hazard was, like, lush and green, and it was like a government-owned island. And so I guess then Vega Punk moved to Punk Hazard, and then the whole disaster took place with Caesar there as his assistant, and that created, like, a giant, like, a nuke going off, like an atomic explosion, which, like, wiped out the initial lab and, like, completely wiped out the island. So it was like a wasteland, which made it the perfect place for Akainu and Aokiji to fight after the War of the Best at Marineford. That battle ended with the island even being more warped, you know, with half of it being, you know, the Arctic and half of it being, like, volcanic. And so after that situation, then, you know, Vega Punk left well after that point, well before that point. And they probably set him up at his current base of operations, which is Egghead Island, which is located in the New World. Get back to that in a moment. Caesar eventually returned to Punk Hazard and was doing work there. You know, the government did not really know he was there doing that. He was working in the underworld alongside, like, Doflamingo. Monet was there. Virgo was there eventually helping out. You know, even he was dealing with Big Mom and Kaito. And Caesar's still in the story. We see him with the Germa right now escaping Totland, and that was a little bit in the past. So who knows? Maybe Caesar might show up at Egghead Island. He might show up and be like, "Oh, Vega Punk, I'm sorry. Give me another chance." You know, maybe. Who knows? We don't really know what they're at right now. Also, Caesar, though, at the best case scenario, Caesar is heading back to the Germa, or maybe worst case, honestly, because now Caesar might be working with the Germa 66, and maybe Judge is like, well, I tried to join with Big Mom, and that didn't work, and now the government hates us, so I guess we'll try to go to Vega Punk, maybe. Maybe Judge and Caesar and the Germa are all going to Vega Punk's island. Maybe every major group in this story, because Vega Punk also has connections with the revolutionaries, because Akuma and everything. Bonnie is there, and she's like, I have dealings with Vegapunk, implying that Bonnie might actually have a previous acquaintanceship with Vegapunk, like they might know each other. Oh my god, the possibilities here are endless, okay? So, yeah, that's two big things about Vegapunk's research. I mean, there's a bunch of other stuff involved here, but cyborg research as well, involving basically the lineage factor, and then also devil fruit research, which, honestly, every single thing might come back to the lineage factor at some point. In order to build an effective cyborg like Kuma's PX0, in order to discover, what the devil fruits really are, he might have, cracked what DNA is and oh, this answers all the questions, might tie back to that. There's other unrelated stuff, like maybe his weather research and things like that. Oh, I wanted to bring that up now. So this is interesting, and people actually brought this up, so thank you. So in the last chapter, we saw the area around Egghead Island was very, very cold. Nami and everybody were wearing winter jackets. Even Chopper was wearing a winter jacket, okay? So it was very, very cold and very windy, okay? However, when we see the island itself, there's, palm trees and stuff. Now, I originally assumed that, they're, metal palm trees, they're not real, right? It's artificial, because I was thinking that well, Vegapunk grew up on Baldimore, so maybe he's just used to working in a cold environment. But here's the thing, what if Vegapunk actually finally perfected the warming apparatus? Okay, so he finally made it, so he took a winter island and he finally turned it into a summer island, let's say. And that actually makes way more sense when you think about all the clues. For number one, when the Straw Hats were approaching Egghead, they see this giant current that was affected because, oh, warm water's moving around, this thing is not natural. Maybe that's why. Maybe because Egghead is originally a winter island and Vegapunk, modified it so the area around the island is, severely cold because all the cold is being pumped off into, the side of the island, okay? Also, when we see Egghead, it is shrouded in mist. So it either takes place in the Mistborn universe, or it is actually, maybe it's a cold island that's being heated, and so the perimeter of the island where there's a certain moment where you're swimming in the ocean and it's relatively warm. There's a certain point where you get out far enough off the shore of the island and it's just frigid, okay? So that area, that perimeter around the island is just bathed in steam, okay? And so that would make sense there. There was another reason too. Oh, it's just because Vegapunk, from what Vegapunk said, or the character that claims to be Vegapunk said in the last chapter, they said, I am Dr. Vegapunk, and I am I'm a scientist despite my mediocrity, okay? So that gives, and then also in the official version, the way that she said it was, I am Dr. Vegapunk. I'm just a humble scientist working for the government, okay? So that kind of reminds me of the way Uehara also, introduced himself in Bleach. Uehara was always just I'm just the humble owner of a candy shop. Nothing more, nothing less, So I think it's, a level of being humble, yes, but I think more than that, it's a level that Vegapunk has insanely high standards for his work, okay? So, he could literally make a giant robot that is capable of, swimming and flying and firing lasers and obliterating mountains, and he would still find something wrong with it. You know what I mean? He would still be oh my god, this robot is just, when you try to move it, it glitches up for a brief modicum of a second, and that's just not perfect, okay? So Vegapunk has these insanely high standards, so the fact that he could not make the heating apparatus work on Baldimore, I think is the reason why he worked on it at Egghead. He's no, I'm finding another winter island, and I'm going to make it right this time, you know what I mean? And he did it. And so now maybe that island is, in fact, more of a summer island or a spring island. Also, it does make more sense because Bonnie, Luffy, Chopper, and Jinbei were trapped, outside in the cold, and then they reached the island, and then they were, drying out their clothes or whatever. But if the island is as cold as it is outside the island, then that doesn't make any sense. It's oh, man, I'm freezing, Luffy. Okay, well, it's all right. We're in this place that's, still, negative 20 degrees. Let's take off our clothes and dry them out in the below freezing temperatures. That sounds like a good idea, doesn't it, Chopper? You know what I mean? Yeah, let's just do that. So no, it's probably a relatively warm island. Although when Luffy was drying his clothes, he did say it felt cold, but maybe he was referring to outside of the island. They seemed their group seemed pretty comfortable when they were sitting in that cave drying themselves off. So it didn't really seem like they were that cold when they were drying their clothes. The fact that they could dry their clothes at all seems to be the actual climate of the island is in fact warmer than the outside. Okay. So Oh my God! So that's the basic stuff there. What else? We know. Okay, we know Vegapunk worked on Kuma, worked on modifying his body into just a cyborg, and then eventually removing his humanity as a pacifista PX0. However, we know that Vegapunk also programmed into Kuma to protect the Thousand Sunny. Remember what Franky said to the Straw Hats after they were diving for Fishman Island? There was a moment where Franky was like, "Hey, do you guys have a second?" And he explained what the situation with Kuma was. And at the end of that conversation, I think it was Franky that said, remember, we owe our lives to Bartholomew Kuma, where in extension, you could also say we owe our lives to Bartholomew Kuma and Dr. Vegapunk. Because if it wasn't for Kuma's wish, and if it wasn't like for Vegapunk actually complying with the wish to, program the like Protect Thousand Sunny protocol into Kuma's brain, they might have had a serious problem defending it. Now, Rayleigh is still on Sabaody. Shockey is still on Sabaody. Hachi was injured. Duval's group was injured. That is true. But like with Shockey and Rayleigh there, I think those two together could have managed to hold off and protect the Sunny. But the fact that the PlayStation, the fact that the PlayStation Zero, the fact that the PX0, Kuma was there and programmed, indicates that we already knew Kuma was like a good guy, because he used to be a member of the Revolutionaries and everything. And we also know that Vegapunk has to. Now, look, it might be a situation where Vegapunk is working for the Revolutionaries, or it could just be a situation where Vegapunk was just moved by Kuma's like, hey, you're taking away my humanity. You are literally, because that's like the government. I don't think that Vegapunk wanted to do it like himself. I don't think it was like, this is something I just want to do. I think it was the government issuing him an order to like take away Kuma's humanity and make a PX0. And Vegapunk was like, I really don't want to do it. It's kind of a messed up thing. I mean, I can, but like, And then Kuma was like, it is okay, Vegapunk. I simply have one desire. If you could program me to defend the Straw Hats ship, the Thousand Sunny, I would be most indebted to you. And Vegapunk at that point was like, all right, I'm literally removing what makes you human. I'm literally taking all aspects of humanity, morality, everything that you've ever been, every dream and aspiration you ever want to be. You'll never love another human being again. You'll never feel any emotions ever again. I am taking all that away from you, so yeah, I could program it in to protect a pirate ship for 2 years. Like, maybe it might have been something like that. Maybe Vegapunk is loyal to the world government. I honestly don't think he is 100%, though. But even if he is, it might have just been like, okay, he still has morals. He still has ethics. He's still like, okay, I'm not going to just, I'll listen to your wish here, considering I'm the one removing your morality from you. You know what I mean? So it might just be something like that. He's not as cruel as like Akainu or like Aramaki is, if nothing else. Might be more similar like Fujitori's morality, if we're going with that. Who knows? But yeah, I really just want this to be Franky's arc as well. I want Franky to just interact with Vegapunk and be like, wow, this is the crazy new engine? How does this work? And Vegapunk explains, and then Franky's like, oh, I understand that. Just like little moments like that would be great. So since Franky developed the Franky Shogun on Baldimore using the technology that Vegapunk left there, it would make sense that the Franky Shogun kind of resembles the design of the Vega Force 1 robot that we saw in the last chapter. Just obviously, Vegapunk could do an even better job than Franky. I mean, like, Franky's no slouch when it comes to this stuff, and it was like a treasure trove. But remember, this was technology that Vegapunk left on an island like decades ago. So it'd be funny if Franky meets Vegapunk. Well, I guess they technically did, even if you want to say that Vegapunk was like a clone or a robot or something. Even if you want to say that, that's interesting because maybe Vegapunk will look at Franky's body and be like, oh, you found my lab on Baldimore. And then maybe Franky could be like, yeah, I got sent there by Kuma. It's like, oh, that old place. I'm like, yeah, it was really cool. You had all those advanced laser technology, and I adapted Wapo metal and everything. What if Vegapunk's like, oh, yeah, Wapo metal. Man, that stuff is a gold mine. Whoever invented that stuff, that Wapo guy, man, he's a genius. You know what I mean? Because Vegapunk and Franky they've actually never met Wapo. Well, Franky did, but in a movie that's not canon. So, yeah, that'd be funny if they were talking about Wapo. Like, yeah, that Wapo guy, he invented the greatest metal in the world, and like Vegapunk and Franky are geeking out over it, and like Luffy and everybody are like, no, he's not. Like Chopper's there, like, no, I can assure you he is not. And it's like, oh, well, he invented a really cool type of metal. It's like, whatever, that'd be neat alone. But what if Vegapunk's going on and on about, like, all the technology that they invented, like, recently, and Franky's like, well, I have lasers and stuff, and Vegapunk's just like, oh, that stuff's like, 3 generations back. It's like I'm running Windows, Windows 15 here, and you're still on like Windows like me or whatever, Windows Millennium or some shit. That's what laser technology. Oh, the laser technology is way better. What if Vegapunk upgrades Franky? Now, from what Vegapunk said in the last chapter, like, oh, you naive pirates, and in the official version, I think they called them like, oh, you dirty pirates or something like that. Vegapunk did save them. But it's also mentioned that, like, maybe he just did that in order to, like, study them. Because, like, they mentioned, like, oh, the robot shark keeps eating everything. It's like, I have no time to, like, salvage and, like, study and everything. So maybe Vegapunk's like, yeah, you're pirates. I didn't save you, but I'm going to bring your ship back and analyze you. Also, maybe to scan and analyze Franky to see what's going on with him. Because Vegapunk is very curious and just wants to learn and understand about everything in the world, probably. So I think by the end of this arc, it's very feasible Vegapunk could become an ally to the Straw Hats. Also, the Seraphim are probably on the island as well, so the Straw Hats might have to fight them to see, like, how strong they truly are. And then there's the whole thing with the G14 and Sword, but we'll get into that in another video this week. This one was mostly just focused on Vegapunk. I feel like this wasn't a good video. I feel like this was just a scattershotted video about Vegapunk just in general that didn't really have a cohesive sort of thing. I don't know about it, but that's the thing. That's the thing when you have, like, a character like Vegapunk that's been mentioned, like, over 10 years ago in the One Piece story, and there's so much build up around, it's like so many theories, and it's like you're not really sure where Oda's going to go with this, okay? There's just so many different directions. But I hope Vegapunk eventually ends up becoming an ally with the Straw Hats and explains to them, like, devil fruits and everything. And we'll see how that goes. Even if Vegapunk doesn't like the Straw Hats and just views them as just pirates and, like, locks them up in, like, a super advanced sort of prison or something, Vegapunk might still explain, like, well, since you're here, I might as well explain my research, because that just might be Vegapunk's personality. Anyway, yeah, that's the video. So that's a good introduction to Vegapunk, I guess. Not really, but that's something. Thanks for watching, everybody. And now, moving on to Monkey Facts.
You got the funky monkey facts with Tekking101.
Alright, so today on Monkey Facts, we're going to be talking about the mandrills. Not the humandrills from Mihawk's Island, from Kurigana Island, but regular mandrills, which are not like regular drills. Now, here's the funny thing. Did you know mandrills are actually related to another species of monkey called drills? Like, seriously, this is a regular drill, and this is a mandrill. So I could end Monkey Facts right there because that blew my mind alone. But no, mandrills are some of the largest monkeys in the entire world. Remember, there's a difference between monkeys and apes. So gorillas are bigger than mandrills, but they are apes. Mandrills can get as big as 28 to 37 inches, so around 3 feet tall, and they can weigh upwards of 66 pounds. The men are a little bit more stockier than the females. Now, it's interesting to note that gorillas can grow about 5'5" on average, and they can weigh up to 370 pounds, as they're great apes, okay? So, obviously, who would win in a fight, a mandrill or a gorilla? I'm gonna weigh in on that gorilla there, okay? So yeah, but in terms of monkeys, they're very large, and they're native to West Central Africa, around Gabon and Equatorial Guinea and Cameroon, that area around there, the Congo a little bit. Basically in the part of Africa that's most likely more like tropical rainforest, like around the equator, that's where mandrills live, okay? Although they do sometimes wander up into the savanna, they can do that as well, but mostly they stay around the tropical rainforest there. They're relatively shy, just like kind of like most monkeys are, and so they also have a very unique way of communicating with each other. So first of all, just in terms of mammals alone, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, mammals in general, including humans, aren't very, like, colorful in terms of, like, just the way we look. You know what I mean? Like, our hair is usually, like, obviously you can dye your hair whatever color. I should just go dye my hair, like, bright pink or something. That's what I should have done. I should have dyed my hair bright pink and then had this hat on the entire time and then just taken it off. Like, what the hell? You know, that would have been funny. But other than, like, dyeing our hair, right, we have, like, black hair, brown hair, maybe blonde hair, whatever. But, like, in terms of, like, the pigmentation on our skin, we don't have, like, bright green or bright blue, or bright red, as in the case with mandrills. Mandrills, for mammals, are very brightly colored.